Hello everybody, my name's Brett. I'm a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh in the Human Geography Research Group, and today I'll be telling you a little bit about my research on neoliberal conservation in Costa Rica. I'll start out by talking about the ways in which humans value nature. Nature can be appreciated in many ways. For instance, aesthetically, in terms of scenic beauty, or for the utility it provides, or as a place of recreation. Of course, there's many others, but increasingly, nature is being valued for the things that it does, like ensure clean air and clean water, or absorb excess carbon. There's a lot of talk these days about ecosystem services. It's the idea that ecosystems perform a variety of functions that benefit society. Of course, this probably doesn't seem like such a revolutionary concept. We've known for a long time that nature has all sorts of beneficial functions. But there is something new, coded into the way that we're talking about these things. Ecosystem services. It's no coincidence that this is in the language of economics. More and more, it's economics that's seen as the most effective and efficient way of protecting nature. We're seeing an increasingly close association of conservation with capitalism. More specifically, we're seeing an expansion of neoliberal conservation strategies. Conservation is evolving to employ market-based solutions to environmental problems. Let me take just a few seconds to explain what I mean by this. Neoliberalism is an economic concept. It's a set of ideologies that stress free and open trade, private enterprise, and a limited role for government. The key features of neoliberalism include privatization, which is the assignment of clear private property rights to things that were previously state-owned, unowned, or communally owned. It includes marketization, or the assignment of prices through market mechanisms to facilitate exchange. It includes deregulation, or the rollback of state interference in those markets. And it includes various forms of re-regulation, but the state's role becomes more of one that simply supports the free market, putting in place regulations that ensure they can operate without interference. The residual public sector, then, is restructured to be more like the private sector, managing it like a for-profit business. And flanking mechanisms are put in place to fill the void of the previous interventionist state. So we can understand neoliberal conservation as a form of conservation that employs these, or at least many of these, core principles. But this isn't just some theoretical construct. It's being put into practice all around the world. Examples range from new forms of watershed protection to tradable fishing quotas and cap-and-trade efforts. This approach to conservation has grown so rapidly and become so widespread that it's caught the attention of many critical scholars. So much so that an entire issue of Antipode was recently devoted to the subject. Leading scholars put forward an array of critiques on neoliberal conservation. Their effort was an interrogation of the alliances being drawn between conservation and capitalism. It's this community with which my research will engage. Their work builds on a foundation laid out by many before them. Noel Castree and Karen Backer in particular have played a significant role in guiding the group by defining and refining the research program. Other key contributions that I'll draw upon include Brenner and Theodore, who define the concept of actually existing neoliberalisms and argue that research on the subject must consider context and place-specific histories rather than grand, location-independent theories. Similarly, Peck and Tickle make the case for process-based analysis of neoliberalism, looking at the ways in which local neoliberalisms are embedded within wider networks and structures. Also, McCarthy and Prudhomme demonstrate how deeply interwoven neoliberalism and the environment are, going part of the way towards explaining the rapid rise of neoliberal conservation. Academic research on the topic of neoliberal conservation is abundant and growing, but little has been offered towards an explanation of how it's managed to become so mainstream. This is where my research will be focused. I want to know about the conditions that are allowing for neoliberal conservation to spread so quickly. I'll be looking at the case of Costa Rica's Payments for Environmental Services. It's a pioneering initiative started back in 1996, nearly a decade ahead of similar projects elsewhere in the world. First, though, why Costa Rica? Well, it's a place with which I'm already quite familiar. I first traveled to Costa Rica nearly 10 years ago as an undergraduate student. Since then, I've returned on numerous occasions and in numerous capacities. As a tourist, as a trip organizer, as a teaching assistant, and as an independent researcher. I have an established network that will support my research there, and I've had plenty of time to get to know the place. Aside from my familiarity with it, though, Costa Rica is also an excellent case for studying the spread of neoliberal conservation. Costa Rica's reputation for environmentalism makes it a model that's often held up as something to be replicated. The payment scheme that I'm looking at is well known in conservation circles, making it ideal for me to draw upon, and that's why I've chosen it. To provide a little background, the payment scheme offers monetary incentives to landowners who keep their forests intact. It does this through a market-based program that raises funds from the sale of ecosystem services. It's very much a neoliberal initiative, in that it sets up markets for the exchange of ecosystem services, in that it was accompanied by aggressive efforts to privatize land, and in that it resulted in the rollback of previous environmental regulations and their replacement with a set that supports the market. Now, this initiative was largely supported in Costa Rica, or at the very least, has seen almost no opposition, which, in a historical context, is actually fairly surprising. Neoliberalism is not popular in Costa Rica. As recently as 2007, there were mass demonstrations against the Central American Free Trade Agreement. That movement was symbolic of the contentious nature of neoliberal politics in Costa Rica. So, it's clear that Costa Ricans view neoliberal conservation differently than they do neoliberal economic reforms. But why is that? This is exactly what I want to find out.